All right, today we are going deep inside a Berlin bunker to witness the final, desperate hours of the Third Reich. And, of course, the man at the very center of it all, Adolf Hitler.
So let's just set the scene. The date is April 30th, 1945. Above ground, Berlin is nothing but a smoldering ruin. You've got the constant thunder of Soviet artillery just shaking the city to its core. And below all that, in what's basically a concrete tomb, the man who started it all is finally facing the inevitable.
So, why did he do it? How does the most powerful dictator in the world end up committing suicide? Well, the answer isn't just about a single gunshot. It's really a story about the total collapse of a man, his entire ideology, and the twisted world he tried to build. And to really understand the end, we've got to go back to the beginning.
Okay, so we're actually going to start where the story ends, inside the claustrophobic, grim reality of the Führerbunker. This was the place where an entire empire's final desperate gasps were heard. I mean, just try to imagine that feeling. This place was supposed to be a fortress, right? And now the very walls are vibrating with the sound of your enemy. The air itself is just a constant reminder of the total devastation right outside the door. There was no escaping it. The war was lost, and the end was literally just meters away.
And the contrast here is just staggering. The powerful orator who could hypnotize an entire nation, he was gone. In his place was this sick, defeated man, trying to hide his shaking hands in his pockets. You know, his physical decay was a perfect, chilling mirror for his collapsing Reich.
So, the big question is, how on earth did this broken man ever become the most feared person on the planet? To understand that, we need to look at the key moments that literally paved his path to absolute power.
You know, when you look at it, his journey was just fueled by rejection and pure resentment. I mean, from a failed artist to a decorated but totally disillusioned soldier, his early life was just one setback after another. He channeled all of that personal bitterness and combined it with Germany's national humiliation after World War I and turned it into this incredibly potent political weapon.
And really, his timing was everything. Germany was on its knees economically. People were desperate for answers. And Hitler, he swooped right in, gave them someone to blame, and promised them a glorious future. He was an absolute master of propaganda, and once he got that top job as chancellor, man, he moved fast to tear down democracy and silence anyone who stood in his way.
So with Germany firmly in his grip, Hitler's ambition just exploded. He turned his sights outward, setting the stage for a global catastrophe that would go on to define the entire 20th century. You can just see the methodical steps he took. He broke every single rule, basically testing the world's resolve to see what he could get away with. And for a time, that resolve was shockingly weak. His blitzkrieg, his lightning war tactics, were just devastatingly effective, and it created this aura of an unstoppable Nazi power. In just a couple of years, the map of Europe was completely redrawn under the swastika. 10 countries, 10, had fallen. At that point, to many, it must have seemed like his vision of a German-dominated Europe was actually becoming a reality.
But you know what they say about pride. His overconfidence led him to make an absolutely fatal error, invading the Soviet Union. The brutal Russian winter and the ferocious Red Army didn't just stop the Nazi advance, they completely bled it dry. At the Battle of Stalingrad alone, the Germans lost 500,000 soldiers. This was the real beginning of the end.
And that brings us right back to where we started, April 1945, back in the bunker. With his armies collapsing on all fronts, the entire world of the Führer had shrunk down to just a few underground rooms.
So he's isolated, and he's getting more and more delusional, totally consumed by this paranoia that everyone is betraying him. But here's the really chilling part. He wasn't entirely wrong. As the Red Army closed in, his inner circle, well, they started thinking about their own survival, and the news they brought him from the outside world would only confirm his absolute worst fears.
I mean, just look at this list. His most trusted lieutenants were jumping ship. Hermann Goering, his designated successor, was already asking to take over. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, was secretly trying to cut his own deal with the Allies. But the real kicker, the news about Mussolini, his friend, his fascist ally, publicly executed and desecrated for all to see. That became his ultimate nightmare, and he was determined that would not be his fate. At this point, the transformation was just complete.
The man who commanded those massive cheering rallies was now this shuffling, whispering wreck. The daily injections his doctor was giving him had little effect. The mental and physical collapse was total.
So, in these last hours, he goes through this series of bizarrely methodical rituals. He finally marries Eva Braun, a truly morbid ceremony, right in the shadow of death. He dictates his will, not with any remorse, but with pure defiance, blaming others for the war that he started. And then, maybe the most chilling act of all, he tests a cyanide capsule on his beloved dog, Blondie, just to confirm that the poison was effective enough for what was about to come.
This was his final, non-negotiable command. See, his ultimate fear wasn't death itself, it was humiliation. He wanted to be erased, to leave absolutely nothing behind for his enemies to parade around like a trophy. His body, just like his empire, was meant to turn to ash.
So, after saying their goodbyes, Hitler and Eva Braun went into their private study. Moments later, that single gunshot echoed through the bunker. His followers went inside and found him dead on the sofa from a self-inflicted gunshot. Eva Braun lay next to him. She had bitten into a cyanide capsule. The pact was fulfilled.
Hitler's death was the end of the man, yes, but it was just the beginning of the world having to grapple with the horrific, unbelievable consequences of his 12 years in power.
The scale of the destruction it's almost impossible to fully comprehend. We're talking up to 85 million people dead. The war he unleashed is still the single deadliest conflict in all of human history, and at its dark, twisted heart was the Holocaust, the systematic, state-sponsored murder of 6 million Jewish people, a genocide of just unimaginable horror.
And just a week after his suicide, Germany surrendered. That 1,000-year Reich he was always talking about, it lasted just over a decade. His dream of a greater Germany ended with his country shattered, occupied, and divided, which of course set the stage for the Cold War. The world he left behind was scarred, and it was forever changed.
Ultimately, Hitler's final hours in that bunker weren't just the end of one man. They were the violent and frankly pathetic end of a monstrous ideology. His story is a permanent, chilling reminder of how a nation's grievances can be so easily twisted by a charismatic leader, and why the descent from a cheering rally to a concrete grave is one lesson from history we can never, ever afford to forget.